This is November 20th, 2012. This is the 8th episode of the Revolutionary Journal. Um, Today, rather than discussing ideas, I'd like to take the time to talk about the ongoing events in Syria and some old and new reports that have come and are coming out from that nation. It is going to be a very news-oriented show. I know I was not here last week. However, I will be doing 2 shows this week to make up for that. So, look forward to that. And before we begin, I'd like to talk about the current conflict that is going on between Israel and militant Palestinian groups in the Gaza Strip, rather than actually the 9th episode being about that specifically. Personally, I don't support one side or the other. So I think that we need to take a step back and examine the situation in terms of who benefits from the continued violence and struggle between Israel and Gaza. The fact of the matter is that the strategy of Hamas launching rockets in Israel has not succeeded, nor is Israel's strategy of holding violence by engaging in bombings and invasions of Gaza. Yet neither has changed the strategy at all. Thus, the reality of the situation is that the current strategy on both respective sides is producing the results that each side wants. I say that the radical Islamic groups benefit from the violence, as it only creates a deeper hatred of Israel for many Gazans, and for those who have had family members killed, they may very well join these militant violent groups. And the right-wing governments of Israel, such as the current one founded in Benjamin Netanyahu, benefit as it makes them look strong in defense, and they can say that only Netanyahu can go and actually protect Israel. You need to keep in mind that it is election season in Israel, so that has to be factored in as well. And in both situations, we see a case where both groups exist, survive, and thrive off of violence that is going on and continuing the destruction to the detriment of Palestinians and Israelis. And the true victims are the Israelis and the civilian Palestinians in Gaza. The civilian Palestinians in Israel, the civilian Palestinians in Gaza, neither of whom are doing the fighting. The group that I worry for the most are the Israeli and Palestinian children. The ignorance and selfishness of their respective governments are causing a rift between them, thus the search for peace between the two peoples will continue. However, like I said, I will be doing the next episode specifically on this topic. Let's begin the show. I'd like to take you all back 1 month to October, when it was reported that a mortar attack had been launched into Syria, from Syria and into Turkey. To refresh your memory, let's go back to the Huffington Post, which was stated on October 3rd that, quote, Turkish artillery fired on Syrian targets after deadly shelling from Syria hit a Turkish border town on Wednesday, sharply raising tensions on a volatile border that has been crossed by tens of thousands of Syrian refugees fleeing violence in their country. In a terse statement, the office of Turkey's Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan condemned the shelling that hit the Turkish town of Akakale, killing 5 local residents and wounding a dozen others. The shelling appeared to have come from Syrian government forces were fighting Syrian rebels backed by Turkey, which called for the ouster of Syrian President Bashar Assad. End quote. The mortar attack was quickly condemned by the West and squarely put on the shoulders of the Assad regime. And information soon came to light that things may have not been as they seemed. Business Insider reported on October 10th that, quote, Turkish Foreign Minister Ahmet Davutoglu told state-run television on October 6th that 5 civilian deaths in a Turkish border town on October 3rd were caused by a D-30 type 122 millimeter artillery shell, which is used by the Syrian army. But Yurt's editor-in-chief, uh, Merdan uh, Yanardog, cited information from a reliable source who claimed that the mortar was given to Turkey by NATO and subsequently passed along to rebels fighting to topple Bashar al-Assad's regime. End quote. You need to keep in mind that this article is not the end-all, be-all of the situation, and that this is still somewhat speculative. However, from the outset of hearing about the mortar attack, I was quite skeptical of the story the mainstream media was repeating. Upon hearing it, my first question was, why would Assad, who is busy with a civil war, and knows that there are those of us who would just love to intervene in Syria, go and attack Turkey, a member of NATO, especially noting that Turkey could then invoke Article 5 of the NATO treaty, in which all members would have to come to Turkey's aid. It just didn't add up to me at all. The New York Times itself even admitted that, quote, it was unknown whether the mortar shells were fired by Syrian government forces or rebels fighting to topple the government of Bashar al-Assad. The Turkish response seemed to assume that the Syrian government was responsible, end quote. Personally, I thought it was within the realm of possibility that a Syrian rebel group, either on its own or by orders of one of the Western intelligence agencies, purposefully fired mortars into Syria in order to provoke a response. I would just like to rest a little bit for a couple seconds and just say that this really links into the Hegelian dialectic problem reaction solution, in which you, or in this case the Western powers or the Syrian rebels, create a problem, launching mortars, get a reaction, and propose a solution that you want. I may have to do a show on that in the future, but let's get back to the news. In more recent news, as you can remember, just a couple weeks back to the episode 3 of the show, Brute Speculation, Embassy Attacks, and Banks, I went and discussed the attack on the Libyan ambassador, the U.S. Libyan ambassador. Sorry, let me rephrase that. Yeah, I went and discussed the attacks on the U.S. ambassador to Libya by Islamic militants. Some rather interesting information has come out. According to World Net Daily, now deceased U.S. Ambassador Christopher Stevens may have been involved in recruiting jihadists to go and fight Assad. The article read, Christopher Stevens, U.S. Ambassador murdered in Libya, played a central role recruiting jihadists to fight Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria, according to Egyptian security officials speaking to WND. Stevens served as a key contact with the Saudis to coordinate the recruitment by Saudi Arabia of Islamic fighters from North Africa and Libya. The jihadists were sent to Syria via Turkey to attack Assad's forces, said the security officials. The officials said Stevens also worked with Saudis to send names of potential jihadi recruits to U.S. security organizations for review. Names found to be directly involved in previous attacks against the U.S., including in Iraq and Afghanistan, were ultimately not recruited by the Saudis to fight in Syria, said the officials. Unquote. This influx of foreign fighters and the fact that the U.S. may have been involved in putting foreign fighters in Syria is very surprising, as it has been reported by CNN 2 times, Long of Time magazine, and MSNBC, and as well as elsewhere from the mainstream media, that there are foreign fighters in Syria. It would not be a stretch to imagine that the U.S. was playing a role in transporting fighters to Syria, as it has been known that they were giving the rebels aid since December of 2011, with former CIA analyst Philip Giraldi stating last year in an article that, quote, unmarked NATO war planes are arriving at Turkish military bases close to Iskenderun on the Syrian border, delivering weapons from late Muammar Gaddafi's arsenals, as well as volunteers from the Libyan Transitional National Council are experienced in pitting local volunteers against trained soldiers, a skill they acquired confronting Gaddafi's army. Iskenderun is also the seat of the Free Syrian Army, the armed wing of the Syrian National Council. British and British Special Forces trainers are on the ground, assisting the Syrian rebels, while CIA and U.S. Spec Ops are providing communications equipment and intelligence to assist the rebel cause, enabling the fighters to avoid concentrations of Syrian soldiers. In quotes. However, I think what we truly need to ask is this. The U.S. is waging a so-called war on terrorism, which is really a war against Al-Qaeda and Islamic militants. Yet the U.S. seems to be quite alright with aiding Al-Qaeda and Islamic militants when it seems to fit their interests. It couldn't be that the U.S. really doesn't care about Al-Qaeda or Islamic militants, or really just wants to pursue its own foreign policy goals. Like, that can't be it. That's just crazy talk, right? But talking about Chris Stevens, Business Insider also reported that he may have been linked to allowing heavy weapons into Syria to lead jihadist rebels we hope to transport to Syria. The article, the Business Insider article reads, quote, the official position is that the U.S. has refused to allow heavy weapons in Syria, but there has been a growing there's growing evidence that U.S. agents, particularly murdered Ambassador Chris Stevens, were at least aware of heavy weapons moving from Libya to jihadist Syrian rebels. The article goes on to state that uh, those heavy weapons are most likely from Muammar Gaddafi's stock of about 20,000 portable heat-seeking missiles, the bulk of them SA-7s, that the Libyan leader obtained from the former Eastern Bloc. Reuters reports that the Syrian rebels have been using those heavy weapons to shoot down Syrian helicopters and fighter jets. The ship's captain was a Libyan from, the article goes on to say about a ship being used to transport these weapons, and the article says that the ship's captain was a Libyan from Benghazi and the head of an organization called the Libyan National Council for Relief and Support, which was presumably established by the new government. That means that Ambassador Stevens had only one person between himself and the Benghazi man who brought heavy weapons into Syria. End quote. Once again, this isn't surprising, as the U.S. admitted several months ago they were aiding the Syrian rebels. Obama signed a secret order allowing for the Syrian rebels to get weapons. But also, about a month or so ago, Reuters revealed that the rebels had attained surface-to-air missiles. The U.S. and its NATO allies are essentially waging a proxy war on the Syrian government, the Syrian people, which has only thrown the nation into chaos as they try to fulfill their imperial ambitions. The Sydney Morning Herald reported on November 12th that Britain supports arming the Syrian rebels. The article stated that, quote, the British Prime Minister, David Cameron, has split the Western alliance with unexpected proposals to open the door to arming the Syrian opposition, just as the U.S. is becoming alarmed at its Islamist makeup and human rights abuses. Downing Street is floating proposals to alter the European Union's embargo on Syria to allow arming the rebels on the pretext of recognizing their right to self-defense. Rebels are demanding weapons to allow them to finish the job removing the president Bashar al-Assad. But with rebel groups admitting to executing prisoners, radical Islamists taking more prominent roles in the fighting, Bishop Cameron's initiative has caused surprise, end quote. And most recently, on November 20, 2012, Britain formally recognized the Syrian opposition. And this push to arm rebels comes on the heels of a French government recognizing the Syrian opposition as the sole representative of the Syrian people. The New York Times reported last week that, quote, France announced Tuesday that it was recognizing the newly formed Syrian rebel coalition and would consider arming the group, seeking to inject momentum into a broad Western Arab effort to build a viable and effective opposition that would hasten the end of a stalemated civil war has destabilized the Middle East. However, for more on this, let's turn to RT.
Okay, that interview a bit earlier on. Let's get bang up to date to talk more about the implications of the French decision. I'm joined live by Dr. Ali Mohammed. He's editor-in-chief of the Syria Tribune news website. Doctor, thank you for taking the time out to be with us. Now, France, then, considering the possibility, too, of arms shipments to the newly formed opposition group, it begs the question, is that even legal, of course, while that EU arms embargo against Syria is still in place? Could they do that if they wanted to?
Well, obviously France and the EU are being selective in applying the law. Not only that it breaks the embargo, but also they will be arming Salafi extremist groups. Is this legal in France? I don't think so.
The UK says the arms embargo should be reviewed. Do you expect it then to be lifted any time soon?
It all depends on the calculations of the Western nations. If they decided to buy in and put their full investment in the war against Syria and against the Syrian government, then they might as well do that. But the important part is that whether they lift it or not, they are supplying arms and money to the rebels, but via local proxies. Maybe they want to do it themselves this time. It's possible.
I know usually it's not much good talking about what if, but why didn't France and the other states recognise the Syrian National Council, the old one if you like, which they supported overwhelmingly originally in the past, as the voice of the people, and start sending cash and arms supplies to the opposition even earlier then?
Well, again, it all depends on their calculations and their buy-in. Back then, they decided to go soft on the recognition part, but again, they did send weapons, they did send money, but via local proxies. Qatar was sending money, Saudi Arabia was sending money, Turkey was hosting the rebels and arming them, training them, and all this was done on behalf of the Western nations, on the Western powers. The recognition part was a little bit tricky back then, and it is still a little bit tricky. Actually, it's very surprising that they are recognizing a coalition that was formed upon the request of Hillary Clinton as a representative of the Syrian people. And this doesn't make sense to me as a Syrian, and it doesn't make sense politically even.
Do you believe this latest group formed in Doha at the weekend will act in accordance with the will of the Syrian people?
Well, it's not a matter of what I believe. They said they wanted war. They wanted more weapons. The first thing they said, more weapons, more weapons. That's what we want. And more weapons are not in favor of the Syrian people. The Syrian people are being killed with these weapons. So no, definitely not.
France now, who do you think will be next recognising the group?
I believe that France will be alone for a little bit, but it could be joined by other European nations. I suppose that Washington will hold its breath for a while, waiting to see what will happen on the ground. But the most important part is that recognition or not, this doesn't change the facts on the ground. And the facts on the ground are in the hands of the Syrian army and the Syrian people.
What about the position of the Arab League? They failed to unanimously recognise the group. Why is that? Or is it just a matter of time?
No, they failed permanently because some Arabic countries are not in agreement with recognizing this coalition. Again, this is a questionable coalition. It was formed upon the request of Hillary Clinton, and it was formed by a lot of pressure from the Qataris and from the Turks. So it's a questionable coalition. It's normal that the Arab countries will not unanimously recognize it.
Do you believe the Assad regime is now doomed?
Well, I believe Syria is now doomed for a few months of escalating violence. Regarding the regime, again, facts on the ground are what determine the fate of the country, and so far the facts on the ground are all in favor of the Syrian country and Syria as a country and as a government and regime.
Dr. Ali Mohammed, Syria Tribune editor-in-chief, thank you for giving us your informed thoughts. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Kevin.
And while France may have endorsed and recognized the Syrian opposition, it really doesn't mean that much. Paul R. Pillar, a blogger at the National Interest, it's a conservative think tank website, noted in a recent article that, quote, the opposition coalition that France has recognized and to which, according to Holiday, it is considering providing arms is by reserving the word coalition. It emerged only after prolonged and intense pressure from Arab and Western governments at a meeting in Qatar for the U.S. Secretary of State, having taken a leading role an earlier exertion of such pressure, and that, quote, pretend this painfully negotiated new structure is a truly unified opposition, that it can provide a basis for eventual political stability in Syria is to ignore how badly fractured the different elements opposing the regime of Bashar al-Assad still are, unquote. Pillar's comments can be backed up with evidence, as on November 20, 2012, the BBC reported that Syrian Islamist rebels rejected the newly formed opposition group. The BBC states, quote, Islamist rebel groups in Syrian city of Aleppo say they reject the new Western-backed opposition coalition. In an internet video, they announced what they called the conspiratorial project and said they intend to establish an Islamist state in Syria, unquote. Later in the article, it states of the rebels rejecting the new opposition group that that it includes two of the main fighting factions in Aleppo, the al-Nusra Front and the Tawhid Brigade, and it gives a direct statement from the groups. They stated, we are the representatives of the fighting formations in Aleppo. We declare our rejection of the conspiratorial project of the so-called National Alliance. We have unanimously agreed to urgently establish an Islamic State. For more information on this, let's play a short clip from Euro News.
A stark message to the newly formed Syrian opposition coalition and the West. A group of extremist Islamists saying they have formed an Islamic State in the embattled city of Aleppo. The words and tone underline the group wants nothing to do with the Western-backed bloc, rejecting what it called a foreign project. This video has not been independently verified, but was released on a website which carries al-Qaeda statements. The head of the new coalition has, according to reports, announced it will make its headquarters in Egypt. Muaz al-Khatib was speaking after a meeting in Cairo with the country's foreign minister, Mohammed Amir. Details are scant, and a short statement released by the Egyptian Foreign Ministry after Monday's meeting made no reference to whether the new coalition would move to Cairo, but pledged all means of assistance to the Syrian coalition. Like France, Italy has decided to give the Syrian National Coalition recognition. A government spokesman said it was giving the coalition political recognition, not diplomatic.
Once again, this should put the entire Syrian narrative in question. Are the U.S., NATO alliance, and several U.S. allies backing the loose coalition that has loose organization, rather, that has radical Islamists within it? Represents a massive contradiction with the rhetoric of such nations, especially in the West, as they consistently state how they oppose radical Islam. However, they've backed the Libyan rebels even after they knew that al-Qaeda was amongst them. We've all seen how well that went. The Libyan government using Sharia law as a basis for its legislation. So, it does not look like things are going to get any better, rather only going to get worse. Until the time we have for today. See you later this week.